Welcome to Lunchtime Learning with LaSalle University's Masters of Science program in Instructional Technology Management. The Masters of Science at LaSalle is all about adult learning, corporate, institutional, and organizational talent development using technologies. This is a glimpse at our curriculum. You can find the complete curriculum online at lasalle.edu/ITM. If you're interested in our program, please feel free to reach out to myself or Josh Kohler. What we need from you is a completed application, which you can find online, and it's free. Official transcripts from an accredited undergraduate institution, 2 letters of recommendation, and a resume. You can find the graduate application at lasalle.edu/grad. If you'd like more information, please feel free to reach out and contact Bobby Baggio at lasalle.edu or Josh Kohler, who is the program coordinator. We'd be happy to get you more information. So right now, we'd like to get on with our lunchtime learning.
I've been on the team 2.5 years, fortunate enough to work with Bobby in LaSalle, and hopefully can add some insights here today.
Yeah, awesome. Mark, can you tell me how to get the videos in front here so I can see you folks?
So each user will be able to control from there the GoToTraining viewer. You can size, if you have 2 monitors, you can, or anywhere, you can move and resize how big the video is versus how big the presentation is. So each of the attendees should be able to grab that. And one other quick note, on the top right, there's a little snapshot, the little camera icons. If you see something you love and you don't want to go back through the whole recording, if you see a slide and you want to capture it, just hit that little camera button at the top right and it'll save on your desktop.
Awesome. Jared Stein from Instructure, tell us a little bit about Instructure and Canvas, and Jared.
Hey guys, I'm the Vice President of Research and Education here at Instructure. And if you're not familiar with Instructure, we serve K-12 schools, colleges and universities around the world with the Canvas learning platform, which is an open cloud-native learning management system. And my work here at Instructure focuses on understanding how education and technology can make an impact. And we use that information within the company to help improve our products and services, but also in conversations with our clients, because we believe that a robust partnership and collaborative relationship helps both of us reach our goals.
Awesome.
My background's in higher ed, by the way, developing online and distance learning programs.
Awesome. Bill Wooten from C3 Integrated Solutions, welcome, and tell us a little bit about you and your company.
Thank you, Bobby. My name is Bill Wooten, and I'm with C3 Integrated Solutions. We are a born-in-the-cloud IT services provider. We focus a little more on the core IT services that all organizations use. We do a lot of work with products like Microsoft Office 365 and the Azure Cloud, and we really kind of have 3 components to our business. The first component is helping organizations move up into the cloud, get their services off of prem type environments and into more of a cloud-based solution. The second piece of it is, how do those organizations, once they're in the cloud, transform their business? How do they use tools like Skype for Business or Yammer or SharePoint to really affect organizational change in the way they do their day-to-day business? And then the third component of our business is general, basic IT support managed services.
Great.
We're based in Arlington, Virginia, and we really appreciate the opportunity to stay here with you.
Great. Well, we're glad you're here. We want to get started here. Mark, I'm going to pick on you first. Talk to me about the adoption of new learning technologies, has led. So what do you think you need to do to be successful with new technologies?
That's a great question, and I think education might be even more challenging than in the corporate world, but as you mentioned, needs to be led. It's one thing to have licenses, it's another thing for the users to use it and to gain value and maybe do something better or differently than they did before. So to that effect, you know, there are a lot of things that can make it successful, with everything from support and training for the users. But I think to get them engaged and to get the buy-in for someone who maybe is newer to the type of technology you're trying to not only roll out but gain utilization of, I think having the peer-to-peer references and the sort of quantifiable success are two really big items. So for example, where I'm focused in higher education, having a faculty person tell another faculty person, especially if they're not, you know, the tech wizards of the school, so to speak, say, look, I used this, it was easy, it was great, it helped me accomplish X, Y, or Z, it saved me time, the students liked it, something like that. So similar in the corporate world, you know, what was the positive effect for your customers? What did it do for you? So having the peer-to-peer sort of references, I mean, you look kind of like an Uber. I don't think they ever advertised, and, you know, I think they're worth $40 billion now. Obviously, fast growth can come from that type of word of mouth. And so that's a big piece. And then I think as you're starting off and trying to get those champions, I think having the quantifiable results post-implementation, post-usage from either another business in the same sector, or if it's in higher education, another college. Here's what, you know, the case study with UNC and the utilization rates and what they gained. You kind of have that post-production case study to show, you know, these are some of the positive effects you can achieve that others have achieved in your space. So to me, it's that sort of encouragement, giving the people the reason to engage, and then once they do, having that ability to, you know, provide the training and support and make sure that they're successful getting ramped up, and then they've created your next champion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Would any of the other panel like to jump in here on this one and give us, you know, we're going to try to keep moving here so that we stay on schedule, but give us any other thoughts?
Hey, Bobby, I'll just add quickly, this is Jared. I think that organizations really need to look at vendor companies as partners, not just product providers.
Oh, yeah.
I think we really need to make it a two-way street. So partners should challenge you to think differently, whether you're the vendor or you're the organization using the product or service. We should share a vision, and we should both be invested in each of our long-term success, not just in closing the purchasing contract.
Yeah, thank you. Great point. Bill, I'm going to pick on you next here. This is sort of 3 questions in one. Who should be held accountable for adoption? Why do or don't metrics like accounts and licenses work for return on investment? And who should be held accountable for adoption of new technologies?
Well, I think first it starts with identifying what are those metrics for. Is it successful? What's the return on investment? How are you defining success? In our business, if it's simply picking up an email box and moving it over and doing a migration, that's a very technical, very tactical type of project that there's a fairly, you know, definable success metric. When we get into other solutions like deploying collaboration or user adoption with things like Yammer, then that's much more of a business process goal. It's a much more of a strategic conversation. And at that point, that accountability starts to shift more and more out of the IT teams and into the business stakeholders for whoever is responsible for that business process. If it's improving a sales cycle or shortening a sales cycle or improving maybe operational efficiency, then the metrics that are used to define that business and how that business is performing really starts to drive whether or not that technology is going to be successful. And ultimately that leads into the business stakeholders. If it's, you know, if we're trying to affect an operational process, the folks that are responsible for operational performance are the ones that need to be held accountable.
Yeah. Great point. Great point. Would anybody like to add to what Bill has to say on these 3 questions?
I'd just say, you know, make sure you identify it up front. Who are the stakeholders and who is responsible for the success of the project? And to Bill's point, it's generally not one particular person, but they might be the spearhead or the figure, you know, if you will. There's generally people under them that are ultimately going to contribute to the success of it. So make sure everybody knows their role up front.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. No surprises, you know. Accountability and no surprises. All right, Pat, I'm going to go to you for number 3 here. With a focus on cost and budgets, oftentimes companies never get to adoption. Later never comes. Can you explain what might be a better approach?
Sure, absolutely. I'll even give a case study on one that we recently, the recent customer. So Arizona State University, they had a video conferencing initiative, and we made sure up front that they understood the importance of adoption services. And adoption services is something you're hearing more and more about early on. So that you added into the budget up front. So they knew immediately they were going to go and have a certain roadmap for success, and as part of that, they were going to go and promote the offering to their target audience, which was their professors and their students. And they were also going to make sure that that was covered as far as a cost is concerned up front. So it wasn't that, to your point, technology, we often see it get implemented, and then it sits there unused. And I've been in the industry 25 years. I can't tell you how many systems I've seen that are $100,000 and up systems that sit there underutilized or totally non-utilized, whereas if they just put the money in, it's a small amount to do some training. And I'll add another little factor there. The training can be recorded on how to use the system and how to get the most out of the system, so that when new students or new faculty come on board, they look and they can go back and say, oh, let me go look at the video repository and play one of those video on demand assets and see exactly what are the capabilities of this system that has been put in place.
Yeah, that's a great point. Folks, if you're not on the panel here, I'm going to ask you if you could please, hi panel, again, this is hi, I can't see when I have the PowerPoint up. I'm going to ask again real quickly, if you could mute yourselves, and I'm going to ask again real quickly. We're going to go through and help people become aware here. So we get the yep, out of there we go. There's always one. If I could get can I get, Mark, can I pull the PowerPoint up and have the video in front so I can see your faces as we're talking here?
Yes, you might just need to resize, or perhaps you've closed it on the Go to Training viewer. You can change where, if it's left, right, or top. If you're on a single monitor,
yeah,
you should still be able to do both as far as your view.
yeah. Okay, so resize the PowerPoint. There we go. We got that resized because all we have is questions up here. I'd rather see your faces and interact with you with a response than the. So we will try this, and then we will try a slideshow from the beginning. There we go. Life is good. I love it. All right. So would anybody like to add to what Pat had to say? Before we move on to question number 4. Anybody have anything they'd like? And folks, if you have something in the chat here, a question that you have, we're going to open it up at the end so you can ask these wonderful people anything you want. But if you have something that's immediate in the chat, Ian, Mark, speak up, hard to hear. So turn up the volume there.
Hey, Bobby, this is Bill. I'd love to kind of add into what Pat said and kind of echoing his comment. We fight really, really hard to make sure that there's some component of user training embedded in our budgets when we present to a client. It's so critical. We see the user adoption spreads are tremendous. Even with a basic tool like Skype for Business, the old link, people get to it. It's kind of intuitive. They figure it out, but that jump into yeah, I can use it every day, and it's really adopted. We see just an amazing spread with just a real short, 30 to 60-minute web-based training on it. The other part of the conversation for us is trying to get the technology team into more of the business stakeholders to help them understand more of those collaborative capabilities. Once they can start to make it tangible to their everyday business needs and what they do on an everyday process, that will also really accelerate the user adoption and the interest in adopting those products.
Excellent, excellent. Jared, I'm going to put you on the spot next. You can take our next question here if you would. Okay, we're going next. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit about true ROI. If the true ROI of investment in technology is collaboration among employees, smart decision making, and the sharing of knowledge and best practices and behavior change, how do companies get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of the points that have been alluded to already about knowing what you want to measure and creating a real deliberate path to get the organization to the point where they can measure those things is important, because different companies are going to define ROI differently. I think the biggest challenge is going to come within the organization itself, within the company itself. If there's any kind of cultural resistance to change, then you really have to be deliberate in kind of finding those pockets within the organization where change is welcome and needed. And that actually might be finding the teams that would benefit the most because they've had the most trouble kind of accomplishing their goals without the support of the new technology. So I think culture is a big part of it, and finding those advocates inside. There's also some responsibility for leadership. So I think part of the responsibility of any leader is to enable their company's progression by empowering people within their company who are passionate about a specific idea or about solving a problem to work with those problems and to solve it on their own. So I think sometimes leaders presume that they themselves have to be the problem solver or the #1 evangelist of each new initiative, but really they just need to support the right people in their organization so that things can happen without being directly under their line of sight.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think Wendy has a good point here too. You need to define a role on training teams for who owns this. Who's going to do the training and the work. And I think your point about pain points, who's going to benefit the most if we actually adopt this? That's a great point. Would anybody else like to jump in here? Mark, Pat, Bill?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's sort of, when you talk about the ROI, there's a little bit of a before and after, and you got to take that before snapshot, no matter how unappealing it might be. And so if it's possible to quantify, and this could be as simple as a starting point could be even surveying the users that the new technology is going to, and the software world, everyone's obsessed lately with NPS, but you need that baseline. You need to see what was it first, so that you can come back and survey later to see the improvement. Hopefully, depending on the technology, there are other kind of objective measurements you can take to quantify what it looked like before. If you're looking at gains or you're looking at cost savings, have that identified ahead of time. What everyone agrees, this is the baseline we're at today. So as you go back and measure down the road, you have that differential to get to as well.
I think that's a great point. So many people don't do that benchmark. So then we're halfway into the project and we want metrics and we don't have any idea where we started. That's a great point. That really is a good one.
Hey, Bobby, building off of that, I think it's also important to celebrate early successes as well. When you can identify some of those pain points that Gary talked about and resolve them or make life better for users, if you can build some excitement around that and celebrate that success within the organization, you'll get more of a pull from that of, hey, how do we get involved in that? How do we get to benefit from these things? It will accelerate some of that success throughout the rest of the organization.
Yeah, I want to just add, I think Wendy made the point in the chat that we need a role defined on a training team. I think that's absolutely true, but I think you also want to encourage innovation with technology throughout the company. So you don't have to be part of HR, you don't have to be part of IT to make things happen. You just have to find advocates who want to solve problems.
I think that's a great point, Jared. I just read a survey, an interesting survey. CEOs were surveyed and asked if the people coming out of school had sufficient technology skills for the business, and 11% said yes.
Only 11% said yes. So this idea that only IT can do it or only HR can do it, no, technology is part of our lives, and absolutely we need to integrate it everywhere, everywhere. All right, what do you see as the difference between deployment and adoption, and what strategies do you suggest? Who would like to take this one? Bill, you're smiling. Let's give it to Bill.
I think when we look at deployment, again, we look at that as a technology goal and objective. Are we going to be able to deploy the technology, get it rolled out to the user base? But adoption does go back into the business stakeholders, the rest of the organization that is responsible for carrying on the everyday business, whether that be in finance or HR or sales or operations. They're the ones that need to be responsible for adopting the solution. And at that point, for those strategies, it's about a lot of the things we're talking about. How do we find some pain points? How do we measure those pain points? How do we set objectives for improving upon them? And then how do we find an incremental approach? Can we find some low-hanging fruit that is easy to affect some organizational change, build a little bit of excitement within the organization, and then the momentum will start to take care of itself.
Yeah, anybody else like to jump in there? Pat, you have something to add?
Yeah, one of the analogies I'll often use is that on the deployment path, it's usually putting the road in place. On the adoption path is traveling down the road. You have to really talk about those things together as one entity rather than two separate entities, because otherwise they're going to end up putting a road down that, quite honestly, sometimes isn't the right path. People feel uncomfortable trying to traverse it.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you get those stakeholders, is what we've been talking about in the first few slides, if you get those stakeholders involved early, especially to Jared's point, the ones that are going to be using the technology, not just the CEO or the CIO or somebody who wants to put it in place, get those involved that are actually going to be using it. They're going to be the keys to your success. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it'll bubble up, and the CIO will either look great or look not so great, but it is really those users of the technology that's going to put them in that good or bad position.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that adoption is not just a destination. In fact, you want to perform measurement and evaluation of your adoption to make sure you're actually seeing the business impact that you want. And I think it's okay. In fact, I think it's preferable to look at this as a process of iteration. You implement, right, after deployment, you implement, and then you measure for impact, and then you iterate, and you iterate, and you iterate until you see improvements case by case.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Moving on here, I'm gonna put you on the spot for this one. We spent an awful lot of money on technology, but I still see people working in the same old ways. Why don't companies actually use the technology they've purchased?
That's a good question. So I think it speaks to how you work with the users, and there are a lot of times where, let's just say, if they don't have the particular accountability, it's at their discretion if they use the technology or not, and that might be the case more so in education than the corporate world. But I think that's where they, you need to do, I guess, a bit of selling and have some motivation for them. And again, that comes from those peer-to-peer references saying, look, it was so easy, I did it, you can do this. And then I think it's also having the support available at their convenience. So it can't always be on recording or a set time. And they need to be able to, when they take the time to figure something new out, reach someone and get that personal assistance. So I think that's it. And as a couple folks here, Jared had mentioned, it's it's a constant iteration and measurement. So you bring up the new success stories. You bring up the person that had a much better assessment of their class because they did it in a flip model, or in the corporate world, we have a lot of customers where the same training delivered online gets a higher rating. Maybe people like they didn't have to drive or travel. Maybe they like that they could ask a question privately where they'd be too shy to raise their hand in a room with 100 people. But those results to come back and say, hey, I moved to training online and I got better results, it gets that next trainer that's used to standing up in front of a room to say, okay, I've got to adopt this too, because my customers ultimately are getting a better experience. So, now education obviously would be the students, but that type of, assessment and sharing the successes will hopefully, over time, drive those users who aren't compelled to do it or aren't held accountable that they have to do it,
Right.
to see a benefit and a reason to start.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point, and I'd like to get some other folks' opinion on this. But to me, one of the challenges with this is always the emotional aspect. Nothing can make people feel stupid faster than new technology. And the smarter the people are, it's always been my experience, the less they like to feel stupid, especially in higher ed. So if somebody else would like to jump in and kind of share on this point, that'd be great.
And I'll give it another little bit of advice. It's train, and train again, right? Continue the training process. One training session right at the beginning of a project and then kind of putting people on their own, forget it. And especially for some of the technophobes who are not used to technology and a little bit more afraid of it, you have to have continuous follow-up. And even if you had a focus group that got together and kind of talked about best practices, and we see it in the video world all the time. We'll put a video system in, and one person gets it, and then they'll talk to another person, and that person will get it. Before you know it, we have a group, and you have to constantly, I can't remember who said it, but you have to have continuous reiterations and find out what's working, do a little bit of tweaking maybe on the training session, but continue the training process over and over again.
Yeah, that was Jared. And I totally agree with that. And not just training, it's emotional support. At least in my 2 cents worth, we need to give people some emotional support here too. All right, so let's move on here so we can stay on schedule. Our next question is, how do you suggest companies embed new work practices, workflows, and processes into an existing organizational culture? Who wants to take that one? Who haven't I picked on for a while? Bill, you wanna give that a shot?
Sure. Yeah, I think it starts with respecting the old organizational culture. Companies do what they do, whether it's correct or efficient, for reasons, and sometimes they're valid, sometimes maybe they're outdated, sometimes they become obsolete with the new process. But you have to still respect what they're doing today on a day-to-day basis. And then it's about demonstrating how you can get that path from whatever they do today into what that new workflow or that new practice is going to be. And it's involved in doing that at multiple levels in the organization. If you're kind of stuck at the leadership level of the organization, you may not get real visibility into how things work at the staff level, or vice versa for that. So that buy-in, that acceptance that the world is going to change for them needs to be done across the organization. And that really means that a lot of times as a consultant or as an implementer, making sure that we have contact across all levels of the organization, that we're being able to communicate, hey, this is what you do today, I get it, I understand why, here's how we can change things. And if folks are a part of that process and they feel like they're contributing to that new workflow design or new work practice, they will embrace it because they own it by the fact that they've contributed to it.
I think that's a tremendous point. There's often a very different path between what's real and what's on paper. Anybody else like to add to that, and anything to add? Yeah, I think that's a good point. Getting to what's really going on, and that's been an issue in IT for forever, forever really. What's on paper and what should be happening according to what's documented or what leadership thinks is happening, and then what's really going on the floor. All right, so let's move on here. I am going to call on Jared next. I'm going to put you on the spot next here. So let's take a look at, we'll move you down here. Why might businesses want to do fewer things better? Explain why it is important to focus on initiatives that will create real value and finishing what you start.
So I think the obvious answer is that we don't want to waste our time on things that we're not going to finish and feel value from. But at a higher level, I think what we're talking about is the fact that humans can learn a lot of things relatively quickly, but the problem is that learning doesn't necessarily persist. The metaphor I like the best is learning is like walking through a forest. The more times you repeat your walk, the more persistent the trail. So, with limited time, I think we're better off focusing on improving a few practices and mastering those so that the people who are responsible for implementing those practices make them into a habit. So once they become automatic, then we have more time and energy to focus on the next practice for improvement. And slowly, again, iteratively, you can transform your organization's culture.
Yeah, I agree with that. There's always, when you roll out a new technology, there's this impetus to change the world, redo everything, and do it all at once while you're rolling out the new technology. Would anybody else like to add to that? Mark, you have anything to add there? Pat?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, it gets down to, do you want to do a whole bunch of things not so good, or do you want to do one or two things exceptional? And you should always set that as the benchmark when you're going on to a project early on. Find out what else is on the roadmap for the company and see where it's going to fit. Are you going to get enough of the shareholders' time to make it worthwhile, or should you just say, something, especially on the sales side when everybody wants to go and make the sale, but sometimes you really need to just kind of sit back and say, something, why don't we wait a quarter until we have mind share for this particular project? Because there's nothing worse than having 3 or 4 major projects going on at once and none of them seem to be getting any traction or come to any good conclusion.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, I might echo here. I'm trying to switch over to the phone.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
So Bobby, I think it's having those measurable, achievable pieces. So you're going through and measuring that we've accomplished X, we've accomplished Y, and now we're going to move on. And maybe if you're teaching someone a complicated technology, you've got some easy takeaway objectives. I want you to get through being able to do X, Y, and Z with this tool, and then next month we're going to go on to A, B, C, and D. And I think that way people feel like you've rolled something out, it's gotten adoption, you've achieved some goals, and now you're ready to move on to the next thing. Versus, I think and this happens to a lot of software companies internally, we get buying other companies, you're doing so many things. You get to a point where if the notifications and the optional trainings are so flooded, the message is so diluted, you don't take any of them. So there's that, like you said, pare it down to do a few things well, have a time frame and a goal, because you might be able to roll out 10 things in 6 months, but just not all at once. So as you get through the first few, people also get that credibility that, gee, they understand this, they're going to make sure I'm successful before I move on to the next one. And I got something out of the first, maybe 2 out of the first 3, so now I'm going to take the 4th one, where if you flood people with 10 things and they're all happening at once, it's tough, So where you can go serial and where you can have incremental steps, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, great point. I think Wendy has a good point here in the chat too. Need analytics to define value opportunities and areas to focus on that prove out impact. This can be very reinforcing to employee engagement, and I think that's a great point, Wendy. Thanks for the contribution. All right, folks, let's move to the next slide here. All right, I am going to pick on Pat for this one. Pat, you get the lead on this one. Explain the benefits of leadership engagement and leading by example.
Sure. This is a tricky one. You want to have your leadership be at that point. But at the same time, as what we've discussed, you certainly don't want them putting down pavement on a road that leads somewhere where the user staff, whoever's going to use this, the end audience, doesn't want to go or doesn't see the vision of going there. So keeping the leader involved, kind of leading by example, super important. But as important, bringing that key use group together and showing the benefits and the importance. And it can't just be, you know, an email that goes out or, hey guys, this is the route, this is the direction that we're going. Make sure it happens in advance in the planning phase. So nobody likes to just have something sprung on them and say, this is the way we're going, you know, take it or leave it. And especially in, I think, today's younger generation, they like to feel more included in the decision-making process and stuff. So again, bring them on early on, explain the benefits, and I think one of the texts that came through, you know, show the data points, show the analytics, so put some measurements up ahead of time and say, folks, this is where we need to get to. This is where I think we need to go. What other ideas do we actually have? Let somebody else, so that they feel some ownership in it. And the more ownership they feel, it's going to help on the back end on the adoption side, without a doubt.
Yep, that's a great point. Bill, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think leadership has an important role in any process in terms of communicating their support for the initiative, communicating the support for the objectives that are being pursued. That can overcome resistance in different pockets at different times. But I also think leading by example in terms of walking the walk and using the technology is critical as well. When we deploy a chat solution or enterprise social solution or even a SharePoint, and all of a sudden the CEO is the one broadcasting his message on Yammer and creating posts, that will create that, hey, I guess we're going this way, we need to get in line, we need to follow. Same thing with sharing a document from a cloud storage solution like OneDrive or SharePoint. Now all of a sudden, you know, okay, this is being adopted, it's obviously the way the leadership is going. That has an important message across the organization that people need to kind of spend some time to pay attention to it and at least make sure that they're aware of what's going on, and then hopefully that adoption starts to take place through the success stories and the incremental gains.
Yeah, Jared, this is a big one, so I'm going to ask you to jump in also, because in my mind, this is one of the reasons it's a sticking point why technology doesn't get rolled out is people are talked down to, and someone is told they will use it, but you never see leadership doing it. You know, you never see them doing it.
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think leadership's responsibility is to model the kind of behavior, the kind of practices that they want to see throughout the company. So that's certainly important. I think another thing that a good leader does is they teach their teams. And one of the ways that they can teach their teams here for the benefit of everybody is really to focus on the problems that the company faces. You know, what a good leader does is they look at the myriad of problems from small to large and prioritize those that are going to have the biggest business impact if we solve them. And I think we need to trust all of our employees to understand those challenges and problems and to buy into that. And that's really where our leader shines. I mean, we saw a perfect case of this at the university where I last worked, where for about 9 years we had been building very, very slowly an online learning program with a number of associate's degrees. And at the end of 8 or 9 years that I've been there, we'd pretty well tapped out the number of faculty who have been willing to teach fully online courses. It wasn't until we actually faced a little bit of a crisis as a university where our enrollments were really outpacing our ability to serve students in traditional classrooms, right? We just didn't have enough classrooms, that the president stood up and said to all of the faculty, this is a big problem. The only way that we're going to get past this is if we do more online learning. And it was that step, plus the fact that we had developed some grassroots support, that allowed us to really increase past what I thought had been our ceilings.
Yeah, we've had some requests in the chat here. We're going to move to the last question, and then I'm going to ask you guys to kind of summarize your challenges as kind of experts in this field. But we've had a request in the chat, if you could share when you answer this question, and maybe the end, if you could share, just like Jared just did, some real life examples. If you don't, confidentiality, you don't have to give us the client's name. You could just say somebody. We all understand that. So our final kind of wrap up question here, before we get to the close, is how do you see the role of leadership in changing the mindsets and behaviors of an organization and implementing new technologies? And what approaches might you suggest to increase true and lasting value? Pat, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
We'll just go right around.
That's good. First and foremost, to me, it's vision. If you've got a leader who's got a strong vision and they can communicate it appropriately, that's, to me, the very first step in getting some mind share.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking vision 3-5 years. Let me show you where I want to take this organization. And that's the starting point. I think from there, if people believe in the vision and he can follow through, he or she, and then demonstrate past examples of following through, I think you're going to really start seeing folks get on the bandwagon and say, hey, I'll follow that person to the ends of the earth because he's done it before.
Yeah. Jarrett, do you have anything to add there?
Well, I guess I would just add that I think going along with vision is making sure that you have buy-in, and that doesn't necessarily mean waiting for a democratic majority to agree, but to kind of taking on the hard task of engaging with your teams and understanding how they see the problems, and again, teaching them what you see to be the prioritized problems, and getting everybody to buy in on those problems, but also then buy in on the solution. And hopefully the solution is the technology. I mean, I avoid talking about the technology per se. The technology has to be a right fit, but really it's about solving problems that we all share and identify as being problems.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Bill, you want to?
I think building off of what Pat and Jared said, it's about communicating that vision and identifying the issues that are a challenge and a real challenge to the organization. But I think those visions and those goals need to reflect a destination that is kind of beyond the status quo. If the goal is to maintain your current market share, well, then there's no reason to really change because you've gotten there. If your goal is to double the size of the organization, if your goal is to accommodate, as Jared mentioned, a dramatic increase in enrollment and where we don't have the facilities to make it, then you're forcing the organization to think out of the box. You're forcing them to change their ways to some extent, and then you can use technology in a lot of ways as a catalyst for that change. So I think that's critical. We deal with a lot of organizations that are going through a high growth spurt. They recognize that their current processes are just not good enough. They can't scale the way they need to grow their business. And that's really what forces them to adopt different workflows, different processes, and look at technology as a vehicle to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree with that. With change, if the status quo is fine, then why should we change? I mean, I think that's a great point. All right, so we're going to open it up here. I'm going to ask everybody to do a closing statement. We'll just go right around again. Pat, closing statement. What do you see as the biggest challenges that you face, and how do you propose that we overcome those?
Sure. A lot of common themes I think we heard here was get consistent buy-in from the team, make sure the message and the objectives and the metrics are well spelled out early on in the project. We didn't talk about it, but a project manager, and that's both on the vendor side as well as the user side, the customer side. Mm-hmm. I can't stress the value enough of having a really good project manager to help keep things on track and keep the project moving along and make sure you're hitting your goals and whatnot. So, those are a few things that I would say up front that are really, really important.
Mark is back with us, even though we don't have him on video. He's on audio. Mark, would you like to give us your summary statement there?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Sorry, as I'm heading to the airport, appreciate this time. And lastly, just to tie into the last theme about the executive, sponsorship. Yeah, I think throughout the process, if you can engage people who aren't part of IT, who aren't technical wizards, and you can get an exec to learn to use a new technology, it shows people that they have no excuse. If this person can do it, they will. But if that person can use it and show impact, I think that type of leading by example, it's worth your time and gold to have a C-level exec spend some personal time to make sure they're competent with the new technology, and then if they show the rest of their colleagues, hopefully that accelerates the adoption and everything else we talked about.
Yep, that's an excellent point. Jared, would you like to summarize here? For
Muted, Jared.
Yo, I muted Jared. Hang on, Jared. Hang on.
How's that?
Yeah, it's better. He wasn't muted,
Okay.
but anyway, he's back. Good.
So we spent a lot of time talking about, from the organization's perspective, how we go about transforming practices of teams and the company in the implementation of technology. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about it from the vendor's perspective, but I think everything we have covered should be understood by the vendor, right? Like, I think the market today demands that vendors understand the challenges and needs of their companies, not just at the point of sale, but throughout the relationship life cycle, right? And so that we think about the challenges of our customers in terms of milestones, and we work together and we figure out ways to hit those milestones together. And I think so much of that depends upon understanding the perspective, having a window into the organization and figuring out what works best for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Bill?
You know what, all great points. I was just I made a couple of notes as you asked the question, and I think everyone hit it. But I think for us, it also really comes down to identifying what are the technical objectives and what are the business objectives of a project. What's a successful deployment from a technology standpoint, but what's also a successful deployment from a business standpoint. And that's what drives us back into those conversations. They need to be held beyond the IT group. They need to be held with the business stakeholders, so that we can understand where their pain points are, what are their goals, what are they trying to accomplish, and we can drive that user adoption to meet those objectives. And that kind of really sums up everything for us.
Yeah, I think that's well put, and I think, Pat, your point about strong project managers on both sides of the aisle is a huge point. Yeah, absolutely. Folks, I thank you very much. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to unmute everybody and open it up. If you could kind of raise your hand here if you have questions for any of our panel members, feel free. We'll let you ask them questions. And so we're going to unmute everybody, and you can unmute yourself, or you can type in the chat, and I'd be happy to relay that if you're having a shy moment here. Does anybody have any questions for our panel on implementing technologies? Implementing, how do you do this successfully? How do you introduce new technologies? Any questions? Any questions, folks? Any questions for any specific panel member?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello.
This is Connie.
Hi, Connie.
We have a situation where our learning and development group has invested in implementing the LMS, but they are currently only using it to basically record courseware, and they were taking in through a normal way of people sending in registrations, and then they are implementing it in the LMS. They want to move to the next stage, and they also want to, at the same time, develop courseware for their LMS. I'm trying to counsel them that, well, maybe you should start out not implementing things you've developed yourself, because that's a whole other learning curve. Why don't you start out with some just utilizing already developed materials in your LMS and get people just used to using the LMS. Any advice on that, or do you think I should have them sort of dip into the water of trying to turn their PowerPoints into learning modules first? I'm not in their department, but I have lots of experience, and they asked me to weigh in on this and help them pick a technology for development, and I'm going, oi, 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 oi. You know, I'll use storylines, but I don't think it's a solution for them. Any advice on getting them to slide into the water more easily?
Connie, can you just give us 2 seconds on what kind of industry this is? Is this a higher ed situation? Is this a
oh no, government.
Government, even better. Okay, somebody want to help Connie out here?
Well, I'll give a comment on this. You know, I think part of the question is whether or not the long-term goal is for this organization to develop content in-house and to really take ownership over those learning experiences, the design of those learning experiences. I think if that's the long-term goal that we are building and we are invested in and everybody cares about the learning designs that we produce, then I think you have to let them start to build them on their own from the beginning. Otherwise, you essentially get trapped in courseware, and it's hard to extricate yourself from that. So, you know,
Okay.
getting a few folks to start to build, advocates, I'm really proficient. I think that's a great way to go.
Yep. Anybody else? You're right, though, Connie. They need to be willing to make the investment in doing it well. They need to find out what they're getting into and make the investment to doing it well. I also agree with Jared. Just sticking what we call canned courseware out there can be a little brutal sometimes. And depending on the quality of what that courseware is, it can have pretty negative effects if it's you know, if it's dull, boring, and not effective. I don't know how else to say it. So anybody else have a question here? That was a great question. Anybody else have a question for our panel? We're about to wrap it up here, folks. As you know, we try to end at 1 o'clock. First of all, I'd like to thank you guys for showing up and doing this for us. This is such a great thing, and you know, it's something that everybody struggles with. You know, I remember back when I taught high school, going through auditoriums of high schools in Pennsylvania, where there were hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of video TV equipment just sitting, just sitting there because nobody was using it. They've invested in it, and nobody was using it. And we have it today. This is Marcus here, and this is one of the reasons we had this topic is my own frustration with my own university rolling out some fabulous technologies. We have Canvas that we love, and we have Citrix that we love, and you know, just getting people to adopt it and use it. It's great. It's reliable technology. So folks, I'd like to thank everybody on the panel for coming. I'd like to thank the audience. We will get the archive out to you as usual. We are taking the summer off, and we thank you for coming and joining us at LaSalle's Lunchtime Learning. We will hang around here for, you know, 5 or 10 more minutes, depending on the need. So if anybody has any additional questions, we're here. And I'm going to stop the recording. And folks, we will see you in September, as they say.